morning, everyone, and a special good morning to Andra Watkins. Welcome back, Andra.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you, Lisa.
Great to see you, too. It's been a little bit. Andra is the author of For a Time Such as This, Substack. It is essential reading right now, and I encourage anybody who is not already subscribed to subscribe to it. I've been reading this for a couple of years now, and it's important. And if more people had been reading it sooner, maybe things could have been a little different than they are right now. But we are where we are.
Lincoln Square certainly tried with that.
we tried so hard, but we're here now, and all is not lost. So let's dive into what can be done. And one of the things that could be done is that the media could actually call things what they are when the Trump administration or other groups take actions, which still to date, there are a whole host of things that they will not label. But we're going to talk this morning about why they won't call Christian nationalist extremism what it is. What's going on, Andra?
I think in American media, religion is viewed by journalists as something of a third rail. They can't call people religious extremists. They can't call out radicalization among religious groups.
Christian.
Exactly. I'll get to that. And that's what they say, publicly. When you ask them about this, they always try to turn these matters into something else that doesn't have to do with religion, unless it's Muslim religion. I did a newsletter today studying how many times the New York Times, which is the paper of record in the U.S., probably still, though they don't deserve that, has used phrases since 1851, like radical Islamist and religious, extremist Muslim and Muslim extremist. And it was almost 4,000 times since 1851 that they've used those phrases like that in the New York Times. It was over 3,500 times that they've used those phrases since 9/11. We contrasted that with Christian extremist, radicalized Christian nationalist, evangelical extremist, and similar types of search terms related to Christian radicalization. And we found a very different story with that. There have only been 10 articles that the New York Times has written since 2012. Since 2012, when we're dealing with this and have included those kinds of phrases. So this absolute unwillingness on the part of American journalism and a lot of people in the American public to call out this radicalized Christian nationalist extremism that we're seeing today, which is what motivated the shooter, Vance Bolter, in Minnesota. That's what motivated him. He is a radicalized Christian nationalist extremist. And we should be calling that out and identifying that for people.
Yeah, we've grown so comfortable with the calling out Islamic Muslim extremism that we now can just drop the extremism, and a lot of people interchangeably use Muslim extremists and just Muslim. And one example of this that I see still coming up, and look, I was a fan of John McCain. I have tremendous lasting respect for his independence and a lot of the work that he did, and that he was willing to call out things. And I don't think he didn't address this head on for any bad reason. But we keep showing the clip still of the town hall that he was doing when he was running for president, where a woman referred to Barack Obama as a Muslim as a pejorative. And McCain stopped her, which was the right thing to do. But his response was, he is not a Muslim. He is a good, decent man.
Right.
And it's so deeply ingrained at this point that we don't even think about, it's not, you're either Muslim or you're a good person, because we've made it interchangeable. But we can't, even with the actual label, specific extremist label, talk about Christian extremists. Why do you think that the American public there would really be this backlash against calling this out? It feels to me like we've reached a point now that um, editors could maybe shift their position on this a little bit.
I would love to see that. Um, I'm Southern, grew up in the South, so it's not nice to call people crazy unless it's certain kinds of crazy. So, but in Southern circles anyway, calling people crazy Christians was just not done. I think across a lot of America, calling out a person's religious extremism, unless you're Muslim, is looked down upon. It's considered too much. It's considered to be rude. Um, a lot of Christians don't understand what Christian nationalism is, in my experience. So I'll start talking about Christian nationalism, and I'll have Christians on a feed saying, "But I'm a Christian and this offends me," instead of listening to how Christian nationalism is something completely different from what they believe and what they worship. So, and learning about that so that they can educate people in their own communities about how Christianity, as they practice it, is not Christian nationalism. They're two very different things. But for whatever reason, we as Americans don't want to confront that. And it's not just in the media, it's in our day-to-day lives that people don't want to call this out and don't want to say, this is not okay. I mean, if you strip away the way a group like the Taliban acts in Afghanistan and overlay some of the stated goals of these radicalized Christian nationalist extremist, mostly white men who are trying to bring Project 2025 to fruition, the behaviors are very similar. The things that they would like to do to people are very similar. The tactics that they want to use to control people are very similar. So, and I don't say that to offend any Muslims here. The Taliban is not all Muslims. And that is a beautiful faith that millions of people practice on this planet. So just because extremists corrupt a faith doesn't make the whole faith bad. And I think that's part of the thing that we don't say enough when
Yeah.
we talk about these issues, that all Christians aren't Christian nationalists, all Christians aren't radicalized, all Muslims aren't the Taliban, and make sure that we say that.
So let's talk a little bit about how this Christian nationalist extremist agenda is being implemented through Project 2025. Um, First, let's talk about Ambassador. I can't believe I'm saying Ambassador Mike
Israel.
Huckabee.
Yeah.
Dear God, what have you done? um, Ambassador to Israel. So can you talk to us about how fundamentally wrong that is to put Mike Huckabee and his belief system as the ambassador?
So Mike Huckabee is Baptist. He is a Baptist minister Very proud of that. And so I grew up in the Baptist, independent, fundamental version of Christian nationalism. So Mike Huckabee's belief systems are very familiar to me. So he is one of these believers in this apocalyptic end times dogma where the world is ending. The clock started running in 1948 when Israel was reformed as a nation. I was taught that from the pulpit as a child and a teenager in a Baptist church in the South. And Huckabee believes very similar things to that. So the nation of Israel, to this group of Christians, the nation existing is very important for their prophecies. They don't care about Jewish people at all. They obviously don't care about Palestinians at all, but they really don't care about the Jews either. The nation has to exist. And for their prophecies to come true, the nation, they believe, has to match their biblical maps of what Israel was 2,000-3,000 years ago. So, that's what Mike Huckabee is over there trying to accomplish. That's why having Gaza be part of Israel officially and be called Judea and Samaria, which is what he calls it all the time, the biblical historic names for the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. It's important to him that those biblical names be applied because he thinks that's getting him closer to his end times apocalypse and Jesus Christ returning and his Bible coming true. And so that governs his foreign policy decisions with relation to Israel. We had people like that in the last administration, the 45 administration. Mike Pence was one of those. Mike Pompeo was one of those. So when they moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, it was to align with these biblical apocalyptic prophecies, because those prophecies state that the Antichrist will rise and rule the whole world from Jerusalem. So that's what Mike Huckabee is trying to accomplish as our ambassador to Israel.
So when people are so confused that why Christian extremists support Donald Trump and say, but Trump isn't a Christian. He doesn't have Christian values. These are the kind of things, right? This is why they're willing to have this amazingly imperfect vessel, because he is getting them steps closer to fulfilling a biblical prophecy
Of the end of the world.
When
I was a child, my pastor often talked about how, in the Bible, at the end, in the last days, the United States does not exist. The United States is not mentioned. I mean, they're so literal about everything. It would literally have to say the United States of America for them to believe it existed. And so that may mean that the United States has to be destroyed for all of these prophecies to come true. So people like Mike Huckabee would probably believe that too. People like Mike Johnson would probably believe that too, that the United States can't be a world power because it's not mentioned in these prophecies. And so they would apply that lens to the decisions they make on behalf of our country for all of us. Our country suffering, and I've said this on my Substack, the more these dreadful, dastardly policies impact Americans, destroy our economy, destroy our currency, and etc., the more these apocalyptic Christian nationalist extremists are going to go, yay, the Bible's coming true. Look, everything's getting worse and worse and worse. Pestilence and people dying of the measles, and all of this is in the Bible, and the dollar crashing, that's all coming. I mean, that's what they believe. So it's really horrifying that we have those kinds of people in charge of our foreign policy now and making decisions for all of us as a nation.
And this agenda is being implemented very close to home for millions of Americans now through, the planned elimination of FEMA.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk a little bit about these changes to discrimination, to allowable discrimination policies in the Veterans Administration of medical care for our vets.
So the medical care piece will apply to any government help ultimately. Several planks in Project 2025 were very important to them. First, that marriage and family was only one man married to one unrelated woman with as many children as God gave them. That is the plank of the first promise, first of the 4 promises that they talk about in the introduction to Project 2025. So, heterosexual couples getting married and having as many children as possible without the benefit of contraception, really, is their dream, especially if they're white people. They want more of those. And so that underpins how they treat who to discriminate against. If you're not married, if you're a woman who thinks that it's God's plan for you to serve in the military or to have a career instead of getting married and immediately having as many babies as God gives you, then we disagree with that version of family and we're not going to support that. We're not going to support those decisions. If you're transgender, if you're in a same sex marriage because you are LGBTQIA, if you use non binary pronouns, if we find out that you voted for things that support those policies and those people, we are going to punish you for that in every way we can conceive of. And this VA directive is just part of that. It's a small part of that. They will ultimately apply that to whatever Medicare and Medicaid is left if they pass the MAGA murder budget. They will ultimately apply that to all kinds of help and government aid.
Yeah, I was reading a piece this morning from the Apologies for Fezzik, my dear dog.
He knows I'm on. I'm a fan of his name. And
I appreciate that he gets this worked up when we talk. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that they decided to mow my lawn during the one time that I'm doing a live conversation today. So apologies, everyone, for the additional supplemental noise we have going on.
It just adds color.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to pretend this was all pre-planned. I was reading a piece this morning where someone high up in the VA medical system was saying, yes, this is being written into the policies or no longer being taken out of the policies. These categories that can now be discriminated against. Marital status is kind of, shocking because it does not say, excuse me, it does not say that you can't, it doesn't say anything about LGBTQ. We're talking about perhaps divorce. Maybe we have a big problem with divorced people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But even if at the within a local VA hospital, the policy there unwritten is we're going to treat everybody.
Mm-hmm.
The legal rights that the people providing care now have are to deny care.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone in your employ does that, even though you feel that it is inappropriate, they have legal protection. You can't fire somebody for deciding not to treat somebody who is in a gay relationship or who is, any of these many things you just listed. So it doesn't matter that people don't believe in these things. They are federal policy. And the people beneath them now have this protection, as people did before there were laws against discrimination based on race.
And I think a lot of Americans may not realize this mimics Catholic hospitals, really. and many Catholic hospitals or other religiously affiliated hospitals across the country, they can refuse to provide treatment if they disagree with your lifestyle, or if you're not married but you're pregnant, or you want to get an abortion, or you need to be given an abortion because you're having severe problems, and that is the solution to the problem. What they're really doing is enabling this religious hospital structure to be applied to the VA, and allowing people to refuse to treat people based on things that offend them because they read in their Bibles that these things are wrong and they believe that's what their Bibles say. So they're allowed to say, I'm not going to treat you for that.
Well, and they're also allowed to say, I'm not going to employ you now.
Yes.
Right? We have new discrimination allowances for and litmus tests that can be included on applications. We saw Pete Hegseth in a congressional hearing this week be asked about a question on an application, not for a political, high-ranking political appointment that Trump was directly making, but somebody in the civil service, asking basically, what's your favorite executive order that Trump has handed down? And we're going to screen candidates for employment based on it's a loyalty test, right?
Well, and a number of people have been all capping Russ Vogt's name in the comments. So let's name check Russ Vogt, because he is a raging, highly radicalized Christian nationalist extremist who is now basically in charge of the federal government. He's in charge of DOJ. DOJ is the federal government now. And one of his stated goals was to make sure that nobody worked in government who wasn't a Christian nationalist. He believes only Christian nationalists should be politicians and only Christian nationalists should serve in government. Pete Hegseth believes only Christian nationalists should have anything to do with the military. So, they very much want to construct a government and a military full of their radicalized Christian nationalist brethren, and have them ruling over us. And so those policies are coming from Russ Vogt. We've destroyed USAID, and I wrote about how they wanted to do that last year as part of covering Project 2025. But they haven't done the next phase yet. The next phase was to get rid of all the people in USAID who were woke and terrible and pushing horrible liberal policies on the world, and hire trainers who would train people in Christian nationalist religious beliefs, and only hire people to work under them who were willing to carry that dogma out into the world, and essentially turn USAID into a taxpayer-funded Christian nationalist missionary program. That is Russ Vogt's vision for USAID. It won't be called that, but that's why they moved what's left of it under Marco Rubio, and that is ultimately what Project 2025 called for. In every area of society where the federal government could give money, they want to force people to abide by Christian nationalist laws and edicts and dogma. So the president's social rant about withholding money from California that has been appropriated because he's the executive and he can. That was called for in Project 2025. That was one of the ways that they identified multiple times as being able to force blue states to go along with unpopular to their voters edicts from the federal government, like we're going to outlaw mifepristone, and we're going to force you to outlaw abortion, and we're going to force you to roll back same-sex marriage, and we're going to force you to not vaccinate people. Those kinds of directives, withholding federal funding, was very much what Project 2025 recommended, and Russ Vogt is absolutely salivating to do.
Yeah. We don't have Musk in the federal government at this point, though. To what degree he's going to continue to meddle in things is sort of undetermined right now, whether he's on the ins or outs with Trump. But this Doge is worse now. Doge in Vought's hands. It is not. Don't feel a sense of relief, folks, and let your guard down and stop paying attention to what's happening in that area, because this Musk had a different agenda, and he doesn't understand Project 2025. He doesn't. Those things aren't important. He had very personal, financial, and apparently criminal investigation avoidance priorities for Doge. Completely different for our friend Russ. So pay very close attention to this. What can people do, Andra? Let's start with, it is not too late to read Project 2025, or at least
Absolutely
go
not.
back and read what Andra has written about it. It's all there still in the archive. It's essential that we understand. You can't fully understand what the administration is doing unless you understand the motivations, what the underpinning of all of this is. So please, I urge everyone to educate yourself on Project 2025 and your friends.
Another thing that's really important along that vein is Project 2025 was not a series of predictions. When I wrote about what their policy positions were, I wasn't just reading a crystal ball. They laid out very clearly and concretely what they intended to do. So they're just following the plan now. It's very easy to read it and see where this plan is going to go. Now, they have a lot of places they could take it, but they told us what they want to do. So getting out ahead of this, of what's left of it, is another real value to picking it up and reading it now, so that you're not surprised. One of the things that I think Americans need to do every day is call your senators about the MAGA murder budget. And it's not just because it's going to do away with Medicare and Medicaid and rob a bunch of people of their safety nets and pass a bunch of money to billionaires who don't need it and balloon the deficit. A lot of what's built into the back end of this MAGA murder budget gives the president the tools to be the dictator he wants to be. It implements a big chunk of that Project 2025 goal in this bill. And we haven't heard as much about that part of it. So it's really, really important that we call our senators, whatever they might vote for, that if you have an office in your area, that you go to the office and physically talk with people. If they have a town hall, go and express that you are opposed to the MAGA murder budget, that you demand as their constituent that they vote against that bill. There is some discord with the Republican Party on the Senate side. So applying real pressure to some of those people who might be wavering could be very valuable and make a big difference right now. This is not a lost cause. So absolutely spend time doing that every day.
Yeah, the more changes we can push the Senate to make, the greater chance there is that they are not going to be able to make peace with the members of the House and come up with a version of this that is going to end up getting passed by both houses. So please, yes, absolutely, essential advice. Call your senators, write them. If they won't hold a town hall for them in absentia and discuss the stuff with everybody who will attend. And we saw the power protests this past weekend. That is waking people up. So the more publicly we are able to do, the better. Andra, thank you for standing up. Everybody on this live, thank you for everything that you're doing. I know we have a ton of people who are activists in all sorts of different ways. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a public activist, but you're doing work behind the scenes. Everything matters. So thank all of you, and thank you, Andra, eternally, for the amazing work that you're doing and the courage that you're displaying.
Well, thanks for having me again. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you, even though we're always talking about these yucky topics.
Someday we get back to Princess Bride, but
Yeah.
not this day. All right. Hope to talk to you again soon. Thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks, everybody.